Thank you. You know, it was about 30 years ago that I first saw America. It was landing at JFK, and I was a 17-year-old exchange student coming from India. And I remember when I first saw New York City from the sky and saw the Statue of Liberty, a very strange feeling came over me. There's a line in the Great Gatsby where Fitzgerald talks about the Dutch sailors who kind of came around the corner and they saw what he called the green breast of the New World, and the sense of tremendous astonishment that they felt. That's how I felt. I felt I had sort of moved from a remote corner of the world suddenly to the center. And I realized momentarily that, excuse me, that my whole life would be different in America. So I'm an immigrant and I love America because it has given me something quite different than economic opportunity. It's given me the chance to write the script of my own life. And it's that idea of the self-directed life that is, for me, what's so powerful about America. I think about Washington and Lincoln, Reagan. Now, when Washington put his life on the line, there actually wasn't an America. There was no country yet. But we have America. And the question is, what are we going to do to keep her? Now, 200 years ago, when the founders got together in Philadelphia, they believed that they had a recipe, a formula for a totally new type of country. And they believed that if this formula were adopted, this new country would over time become the strongest, the most prosperous, and the most successful country in the world. And here we are, America, and we are on top of the world. America has been a superpower for about 60 years since World War II. America has only been the sole superpower for 20 years since the Soviet Union collapsed in 1992. But even now, at a moment of American triumph, I think we feel in America, not just us in this room, but more broadly, a kind of drag pulling us down. And we look abroad, and we don't see where the threat is coming from. I mean, there aren't any Nazis on the horizon. The Soviet Empire has collapsed. Sure, there's agitation in the Crimea, Vladimir Putin. Sure, the radical Muslims are up to no good. But they don't have the power to existentially threaten us. They can't, in a way, alter our way of life. So if there is a drag on America now, it's coming from inside America. Something is pulling us down from within. So what is that? And how is it going about doing this? Now, in 2016, I focused on one man, Obama, the kind of uniqueness of Obama, his sort of anti-colonial third world ideology. We made some predictions at the end of the film, very specific ones. If Obama keeps going the way he is, he will, in 8 years, have doubled the national debt. So the national debt was about $8.25 trillion when he came into office. It's now over $17 trillion. So we predicted that Obama would undermine our allies and allow our enemies on the world stage to consolidate their power. And today, America is much weaker in the Middle East, in Asia, in South America. We predicted that Obama would do very little to block other countries like Iran from getting or modernizing their nuclear arsenals. He would devote his energy to slashing our nuclear arsenal, which is what he has been diligently doing. Now, the key point of 2016 is that it is a mistake to see Obama as, in the words of a very successful book, came out a few years ago, it's a mistake to see Obama purely as an amateur. We make this mistake because we judge Obama by our standard. And by our standard, he's not doing very well. But by his standard, he's doing spectacularly well. It's like someone said to me the other day, Reagan was a real bungler. He was a real fool. I said, how is that possible? He said he would bring down inflation, and he did. He wanted to end the Soviet Empire, and he did. He wanted to promote the Reagan doctrine, and he did. And this guy said, well, I don't care about any of that. I'm thinking of things like funding for AIDS. I'm thinking about things. So my point is only this. He was measuring Reagan by a completely different compass. And by that standard, Reagan was a disaster. We say things like, Obama doesn't understand that if you raise taxes, it's going to have a negative effect on jobs. Obama doesn't understand that, Vladimir Putin used to be a member of the KGB. And you have a lot of conservative punditry trying to instruct Obama about where the Crimea is really located. Kind of give him lessons in world geography and history. But Obama knows all this. He gets a daily briefing much better than any of us. He is actually remaking America in precisely the manner that he said he would and has intended to from the beginning. So he has a very different idea of America. But that was the movie 2016. One man, however powerful, cannot remake a country. He needs a whole powerful group of people. He needs control of many institutions to actually do that. In other words, Obama needs a movement. He needs this whole progressive movement to carry out what he's doing. Now, Obama did not create that movement. It created him. So, it's important to realize who these progressives are, how they think, and why they're winning. Because it's not possible to fight effectively if you don't have a clear-eyed view of the battlefield. So I'd like to speak briefly today about what that battlefield looks like. In this little trailer that you saw for our film, I wanted to bring forward the core idea of modern progressivism that lies behind all its major policies. And the core idea of American progressivism is that the wealth of America, of the whole country, including yours, is based on theft, is stolen. Now, this idea has a historical component and it has a contemporary component. The historical component, well, you heard it. We took the country from the Indians. We stole the labor of Americans. I mean, if you think about it, slavery is nothing but theft. It's making a guy work for you for free. We took half of Mexico in the Mexican War. Capitalism, the free market system, theft. That's the meaning, by the way, of Obama's infamous "you didn't build that." What's he really saying? He's really saying that society creates wealth collectively. And then greedy small businessmen, greedy entrepreneurs swoop in and grab it. But it's not theirs. And therefore, if the government comes to take it or confiscate it, they're not taking your stuff because it doesn't belong to you in the first place. And this historical argument about theft is not one you can totally ignore, because what the progressives are really saying is that we are all in America as a country in possession of stolen goods. It's kind of like if you have in your house Nazi art treasures that were taken from Jewish homes. You can say, well, I didn't steal it. That could have been my ancestors. It wasn't me. But the fact of the matter is that if that's how you got them, they don't belong to you. And when the owners claim them, they have to be given back. Now, and finally, the idea is also that American foreign policy is based on theft. America goes abroad only to countries that have minerals, resources, and oil. This is why America has never invaded Haiti. Because the Haitians don't have oil. Now, this notion that the wealth of America is based on theft, I was actually talking to somebody about the movie, and he's like, Dinesh, don't bring that subject up. He's like, why are you talking about this? And I said to him, listen, it's not me. I have a 19-year-old daughter. She's in college. Every single day, our children and grandchildren are getting this hammered into them in elementary school, secondary school, and university. This is the non-stop drumbeat of our time. And if we want to know why young people are moving to the left, signing up for progressive causes, it's because these arguments are never answered. They cannot be answered with the normal Republican chants of liberty, freedom, rah, rah, rah. That doesn't work for two reasons. The first reason is that in any society, the highest principle is not liberty. The highest principle is always justice. When you see something that's unjust, it makes the blood boil. And the left has grabbed onto the issue of justice and made it theirs. The American Revolution was a revolution against injustice. If you read the Declaration of Independence, it speaks less of freedom than a series of injustices perpetrated by the Crown. Liberty or freedom is the solution to the problem of injustice. When the British Crown is tyrannizing over people, and because human nature is that way, the idea is let's limit the power of the government so that people have the space to live their own life. That's a remedy for injustice. The point I'm trying to make is that as conservatives, we play our king, liberty, to which the left plays its ace, justice. And in some sense, we have to contest them on that ground. You can't give it up to them and let them have it. Now, I'll say a word about economics here, because really since the last election, there's been a great focus on America divided between the makers and the takers. And our politics would be completely hopeless if it was the case that the number of takers is multiplying and the number of makers is decreasing, so that at some tipping point, the whole game is lost. But in my view, this is actually not an accurate description of American politics. The biggest federal government grants that are given in this country go to the poorest states in this country, which are states like Mississippi, which vote overwhelmingly Republican. The politics of this country are not divided between makers and takers. And I want to illustrate that by a point that became very clear to me a couple months ago. I was speaking at CPAC. And as I pulled into park at that nice resort outside of Washington, D.C., where they have this conference, I was talking to the guy who parks cars for this resort, the valet. And I want to look for a moment at the world as it looks from that guy's point of view. So here's how he's thinking. He's thinking, well, it costs $25 to park a car at the Gaylord or the Ritz-Carlton or the W Hotel. And he goes, how many cars did I park yesterday? Let's say 100 cars. So I made $2,500 for that resort. How much did they pay me? $100. So where did the other $2,400 go? Now, from this guy's point of view, he is not a taker. In fact, he thinks he's a maker. Who parked the car? He did. And where did the money go? From his point of view, it went to some rich fat cat who, as we speak, is taking his girlfriend to Hawaii and spending the other $2,400. From the valet's point of view, that guy is the taker. This is the moral force behind Obamaism. It is the idea that hardworking people who are promised the American dream are being screwed by our economic system. So this is the landscape that we are facing now. And in the new film I'm making called America, I take this whole argument head on. I think it's very important for us to make a moral defense of America and of the free market system. You have to answer the charge of theft, and you actually have to account for where the other $2,400 went. You can't just say, capitalism, free markets, that's the best system, that's made us prosperous. The left agrees. You know, in the 20th century, there was a big fight over which economic system works better. And capitalism did win that debate. And then Bill Clinton said the era of big government is over. But the reason that the era of big government is back is that while capitalism won the economic debate, it never really won the moral debate. And the central thrust, and Obama keeps chanting fair share, is not just because he's appealing to justice. A very powerful idea, by the way, particularly for young people. Young people are naturally idealistic. I don't think it's actually a good answer to say to them, wait till you're 40 and you'll become jaded like we are. I think I like a conservatism that appeals to that idealism. And that's when you find, as in the Reagan era, young people flocking to our side, because Reagan didn't make those people cynical, me being one of them. He actually showed us a better way to be idealistic. Now, in order to get a really good sense of our politics right now, it's important to see what is the emotion that's driving modern progressivism. See, what's going on, if you look at the public debate right now, there's a kind of inequity of accusations. So the liberals will say, you conservatives are warmongers, and you're greedy, and you're selfish, and you're materialistic, and you're racist. And what do we say about them? We say, you are actually well-meaning people whose policies just don't work very well. You are trying to help the poor, but your means of doing it is ineffective. But are we actually giving a correct description of our opponents? No. So let's try to do that, because I think out of that comes a really good strategy. This is a kind of call to action, and notice I've issued no call to action. But I'm going to get there. It has to come out of, as I say, Any battle plan has to come out of a realistic assessment of what the field is like. So what is actually driving our opponents? So now imagine a guy who's working really hard, sweeping an office floor, or even somebody who is adding up numbers all day for a living. And now this guy's leaving his office and he's going home. And then he looks into the glass wall of a restaurant. He looks inside. He sees all these people, eating $30 steaks, and wine is flowing, and they're laughing, and there's a big limousine outside. And the guy goes, what the heck? What's going on here? Why are those guys over there, and why am I over here? My home is underwater, I've got credit card bills. And then he begins to experience that most natural and yet most powerful of human emotions, which is envy. Envy. We hear all day about greed, but greed is out in the open. Very hard not to see it. In fact, people who are greedy know it. They're in open pursuit of something. Envy is an incredibly secretive emotion. People don't like to admit it, even to themselves. Now, envy is not the belief that somebody else has something that I would like to have. That's not envy. That's pre-envy. Because you could say, somebody else has something I'd like to have. Gee, I should start a business. I should work harder or smarter. So that would be a very normal response. But envy begins when you don't have that response, and instead you say something like this: I don't know any way to get what he or she has, and therefore, if I can't pull myself up, I would like to pull that person down. The key to envy is it wants to level no matter how. Now, envy is always accompanied by two cousins: hatred and self-hatred. Now, hatred is a little more easy to understand, because when you despise someone for having something you don't have, you begin to detest them. You begin to, in a sense, take pleasure in their unhappiness. But self-hatred is a little more mysterious. Why would someone feel self-hatred? I think this is a phenomenon peculiar to our time now. Because if you lived in older times, and particularly way back in like aristocratic society, envy was not accompanied by self-hatred. Why? Because you don't feel self-hatred. Self-hatred comes out of a feeling of inferiority. You don't feel inferior if your station in life is given purely by luck. So, for example, let's say you're born a serf. You go, shoot, I'm a serf. This stinks. I wish I was an aristocrat or a count or a marquis, but you still know that that was just the luck of the draw. You got the short end of the stick. Bad luck. So you might still think, I'm a serf, but I'm a really smart serf. It's really too bad that that doesn't really count because it's all based on birth. But today, imagine if you're in a society where you do have equal rights under the law, where you have this great economic change, where you could have started that business that made some guy in LA $8 million, where you could have started that website, where you could have thought of Facebook. You could have, but you didn't. And so it begins to dawn on you as you look into that restaurant and you see all these people that you actually realize that you have participated in a race where the clock went off and the gun went off and the clock went on, and you just didn't hit the finishing tape in the front. In other words, the idea begins to creep into your mind that you suck. Now this is a very dismaying thought. And right here, we are beginning to burrow under the emotions of modern liberalism, which I think is driven by these deep human motives of envy, resentment, hatred, and self-hatred. But normally, those emotions are kind of impotent. because you don't know what to do about them. But this is just when the Obama type comes along and says to you, Dinesh, I know you're feeling kind of disgusted with yourself, but don't feel bad. You're actually not envious. You are righteously indignant. You are not feeling hatred, you're feeling the natural resentment of somebody who has been victimized. You see, those people have been stealing from you. They're in possession of your stolen goods. But here's the good news. You don't really have to do a whole lot. You just have to vote for me. I will then go and take those goods, and I will give some of them to you. So what happens here now is we're beginning to see an alliance between the ideology of envy and a political class no less envious that wants to see power in our society move away from business and entrepreneurship and toward government. And the whole ideology you saw up here about theft, that's the propaganda arm of modern progressivism. Because it's one thing to motivate an envious guy to go and try to grab something, but you also have to shame the other guy into being willing to part with it. So the whole ideology of shaming us, it's not just, we may think, why are these people doing this? In what other country do you have a whole ideology to undermine patriotism? Is it because they're just facing up to our country's history? One of the things you'll see if you come and see our film is that this view is not actually American history. It's a cherry-picked view of history. And it jumps over whole decades, indeed centuries. So when you talk to a pretty well-educated 19-year-old, they literally think that American history goes sort of like this. There was this horrible man named Christopher Columbus who simply went too far. It would have been better if he didn't come, but he began this looting, genocide, seizure of land. Then you fast forward to a group of hypocrites called the American Founders, who said all men were created equal, but then had slaves. And then you fast forward to the Civil Rights Movement, where you have Rosa Parks and the woman and Martin Luther King. And that's kind of American history in a nutshell. Everything else is left out. And no other names are even familiar to most people. If you ask them, name 5 other people in American history who did anything, they don't know. This is the history. Now, what I'm saying is that this is not history. This is a few facts that have been culled out of history to serve a morality tale and to serve the very important project of shaming people and putting them up against the wall so that they'll be more willing to give up their stuff when they come for it. They will be more willing to return these stolen goods when the time comes for it. I don't want to overrun my time. I have a lot more to say. And there's a lot in the movie that is like this. It will open your eyes and put you into a new landscape, which is where we need to go if we're going to fight this battle. Why? Because as conservatives, and this is even more true of the Republican Party, we've basically been sleeping since the Reagan era. We repeat the same slogans of 30 years ago. I love Reagan. I'm a young Reaganite. I wrote a book on Reagan. But while the principles of Reagan are completely sound today, we do need a new understanding and a new vocabulary to transmit our ideas. The left today has encircled and taken over pretty much all major institutions. The schools, the universities, the museums, the majority of the media, Hollywood. And so, it's no surprise that the conservative message is, having trouble getting out. It's being blocked at every turn. And you have to fight back on this bigger battlefield, because otherwise you sit around thinking, how do we get the Senate back? Meanwhile, the left is shifting the whole culture, so that by the time the issue even comes up, you've lost the debate. Even your guys end up being their guys, because the left has moved the actual goalposts. They've redefined the center. You only win in politics when the opportunists are coming to your side. We shouldn't necessarily punish our opportunists. We should recognize that our opportunists are fleeing to what they think is successful ground. So, what do we do about all this? Well, here's, I think, the encouraging news. Years ago, when I was in college, I had a professor who talked to me about the lion tamer and the lion. So here we are at the circus, and here's the lion tamer with his little stick. And here's the lion prancing around to the stick. And the professor said, who is more powerful, the lion tamer or the lion? The lion. So why is the lion doing what it's doing? Because the lion doesn't know that. The lion thinks that the lion tamer is more powerful. The truth of the matter is that the people who are against us are not that powerful. And they're not that numerous either. A couple months ago, I was debating the domestic terrorist Bill Ayers at Dartmouth. And so at dinner, he was entertaining us with all kinds of jokes. He's like, well, I'm not Obama's real dad, and this kind of thing. And as we're talking to him, I said to him, well, you're one of the founders of the SDS, the Students for Democratic Society, at the University of Michigan in the 60s. And that's a university with 25,000 students. How many SDSers did you guys have to be able to dominate the politics, not only of that university, but of a whole generation? He goes, Dinesh, at our peak, we had about 400 of us. But we were organized, we were determined, we would do almost anything, and we were smart. Abraham Lincoln once said, America is ruled by public opinion. But he did not mean that America is ruled by the opinions of the public. The fact of the matter is that the ordinary John Q. public is indifferent to politics. He or she votes once every 2 or 4 years if it's not raining. That person's influence rightfully is close to nil. Lincoln's point is, public opinion is the people, and I estimate today it's about 100,000 people, who are actively hands-on involved in the process. These are the people who are delegates, or they're bloggers, or they're lobbyists, or they're writers. In some way, they are devoting time, energy, and commitment. And they're not just devoting time, they're fighting smart. A relatively small number of people, going back to the 60s and continuing more recently, have moved this country in the way that it's been moved. It doesn't take that many of us to move it back. For most of my career, I've been a writer and a speaker. And but then I noticed that in media, for many years, going back to the 80s, as conservatives and Republicans, we complained that the media is biased, that Reagan had to go over the heads of the media. But then along came Roger Ailes, and he said, wait a minute, if the media really is biased, if they're only servicing the values of half the country, there should be an incredible opportunity to have a conservative network that will offer a different point of view. That will not only be desirable, it will actually be commercially viable, because all the media is doing this, and there's room for one person to do something different. The reason I've put one foot now into the whole business of films is for the same reason. If it's true, as it is true, that Hollywood is left-wing, totalitarian in its mindset, relatively brain-dead in its ideas, I'm told that the way you pitch a movie these days is it has to be a hybrid of two existing movies. Like, I got an idea for a movie, and it's kind of like When Harry Met Sally meets Terminator. Oh, yeah, I get it. I get it. And also expensive. Hollywood's making movies for $25 to $50 million, spending another $25 million to market them. So you don't make a profit until you have $70 million of revenues. So, with 2016, we said, okay, if you can make a good movie for $3 million and spend another $10 million to market it, you can give Hollywood a run for its money, not just in making a successful film, but actually in attacking their whole business model. Their whole business model relies on high costs. So if you can move in, what we're trying to do with the America film is not just embarrass Michael Moore, make the most successful documentary. We're actually trying to give conservatism in the market a enduring footing in Hollywood, and we're basically trying to decimate those guys and destroy their business model. And quite honestly, if we can do it in media and in Hollywood, it has to be done in education as well. Now, this is not just about setting up an alternative, conservative college. It's not about sending Anne and me and others to go speak on campus. That's hit and run. We're in on Monday, we're gone on Tuesday. But 400 liberal professors are fat and happy and continue like sheep to graze unmolested. They're not scared of who are actually funding them. They're not scared of alumni or state legislatures. The faculty are completely in control. So our mission is really very simple. We have to figure out a way to molest those sheep. And that means disrupting their world. And the beauty is we're living at a time when technology and imagination enable us to do that. So I leave you with this concluding thought, and that is, right here in this room, in a small group of 500 people, there is actually enormous concentrated power. It's being, and this is the bad news, woefully employed. But its potential is huge. And so what we need to do is start thinking about what this battlefield looks like, where our energies are best deployed, and how we can take on this very determined adversary. See, the left is very purposeful about achieving its objectives. Obama wakes up every morning and he knows what he wants to do. And we're contemptuous, oh, he's going to change America with the pen. Frankly, we had 8 years to change America with the pen, and we left the pen in our pocket. We sit around when we're in office, they come in, and they start doing stuff. And if they don't have the Congress, they go for it themselves. In short, we have to become a little like them. This doesn't mean that we're not philosophically conservative, but we've got to think more creatively about how we engage our opposition. I think if we do that, we will see that our values, the three prongs of Reaganism, the idea that the world is a dangerous place. We've got to be aware of that. The idea that earned success is what truly builds self-esteem, and not merely receiving something for nothing. And also, finally, the third idea, which is that freedom doesn't just exist for its own sake. It exists to produce the decent society. This three-pronged Reaganite platform is enormously appealing. We don't have to change our principles. They're completely relevant today. But we have to figure out new ways to articulate and get that message out. And if we do that, we will be true to the legacy of Washington and Lincoln and Reagan. We will have found a way to restore America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.